According to Roman Mama of the USA Today, he writes in Viewpoint, college athletes should be paid that in 2014 the NCAA made more than $1 billion. This chart shows just an exponential growth of the NCAA from the past 10 years and how they've making almost $1.05 billion in 2015. Not only that, but 24 athletic programs made more than $100 million. This shows that not only does the NCAA make a lot of money off student athletes, but the school does too. So why shouldn't these athletes that are putting on these events, playing these sports, be paid? Some people believe that they are getting enough compensation from the scholarships that they receive to play at a particular Division I school. These scholarships can be anywhere from partial scholarships to full rides, which in turn makes school free. However, they only cover the basics such as tuition, housing, meal plans, books, and those unknown university fees that everyone has. This doesn't leave the athletes with a whole lot of money for personal needs, and since they are playing a sport, they don't have time to work to make the money on their own. Not only are they playing a sport, but to be eligible, they have to be a full-time student, which is 12 credit hours a semester. This leaves little free time for these individuals, much less time for them to work. I have multiple friends that play college sport, and the time they put in their sport is incredible. I asked one of my friends that is a football player at Drake University, and he said that he sometimes has football for over 7 hours a day. It's not just that the practices they have, but the study hours the coaches require, team meetings, and film sessions, and sometimes athletes can miss multiple classes a week if they have to travel to their games. So today I'm going to show you that because college athletes don't have time for a job, because their sport and school take up so much time, and that these schools are making an astronomical amount of money off these athletes, they deserve to get compensated. First, I'll talk to you about how much a college sport requires of these individuals. Secondly, the amount of money these universities and NCAA make and how these athletes don't get any of it. Lastly, how beneficial it would be for these athletes to stay and get a degree, and getting paid would increase that. Let's talk about how much time these college sports require of these athletes. These college athletes are putting in a tremendous amount of time on their particular sport without getting any compensation. According to Jared Walton and Blake Marshall of the Daily Utah Chronicle, they wrote in USA Today College that in an NCAA survey in 2011, that Division I football players averaged 43 hours of practice a week. And there wasn't that much of a drop-off with baseball players who average just over 42 hours a week and basketball players that average just under 40 hours. This amount of time is equal to a full-time job. And here there's just another chart. It divides by days, and it shows that baseball players reporting that they work they have a sport over 6 hours a day is 48%, whereas football is 52%, so it just shows you how much time they really put into their sport. These universities that they attend try to say these athletes are students first, but in reality they aren't. They're athletes first, then students. This is because they're spending more time on their athletic sport than they are at school. Whether it is attending class or working on homework or studying, they're still spending more time at practices, film sessions, or even team meetings. Like I mentioned earlier, Division I baseball players are averaging just over 42 hours a week on their sport, which is 10.5 hours more than they are focusing on their school. This doesn't just happen when their sport is in season. In fact, they spend more time in off season on their sport than they do in season. Now there is an NCAA rule that limits these athletes to just 20 hours a week for their sport, but there are a lot of loopholes in this. For example, if you're injured, medical treatment and physical rehabilitation doesn't count. Traveling to road games don't count, and when there's a football game on Saturdays, these football players, their game only counts as 3 hours. However, they're at the stadium for over 7 hours. Also, when coaches hold voluntary workouts, they aren't always voluntary. They just have to label them as such to get around this rule. These are just some of the ways to get around this rule. Getting around these rules allows these players to get better and produce a better product, which makes more money for the universities and NCAA. Since we talked about how much time they spend, we can now talk about how much money they make, the universities and the NCAA. Like I mentioned earlier, these athletes are making an astronomical amount of money without getting anything in return. Not only do they not make money from playing a sport, but they can't make money from anything else, including sports on their own, including their name. For example, this is a picture of Donald De La Haye, who was the University of Central Florida kicker before he lost his eligibility because he made a YouTube channel that would post trick shot videos and other videos. But in order to watch these videos, you had to pay to subscribe to this, which the NCAA deemed illegal because he was making money. He decided that he was going to pursue his dream, which was making and editing these videos, and not play football anymore. And since he was not an athlete of the school anymore, he was allowed to make that money. Another example regarding a more popular college athlete is Johnny Manziel, when he was suspended for a half of a game because he was selling his autograph to fans for money. The NCAA also deemed this illegal because he was making money off of his own name in college. However, these same universities in the NCAA are allowed to use these athletes' names and faces on billboards and signs to promote their own brands and sell tickets. In 2016, according to Court Gaines of the Business Insider, he writes in the difference in how much money schools make off college sports is jarring, that the total of 231 Division I schools, they generated a total of $9.15 billion in revenue during the 2015 fiscal year. How can these schools generate this much money and not be able to pay their athletes who are responsible for a lot of this revenue? We can now finish up talking about how beneficial it would be for these athletes to stay and get a degree, and how paying these athletes would be an incentive or motivation to keep them. If these athletes were to get paid, they would be much more likely to stay in school, and the graduation rates of these student athletes would increase. However, since no college athlete gets paid at this time, there isn't much of an incentive to stay, where the top players in the basketball, baseball, football, and hockey can get drafted and sign a multi-million-dollar contract and signing bonus. Staying in college would help the majority of these athletes in the long run, because most of these athletes won't make it professionally, and the ones that do aren't guaranteed a long and prosperous professional career. According to Jake New, who wrote A Long Shot, in 2015 that more than 75% of men's Division I basketball players think that they'll play in the NBA. However, in reality, only 2% play in the NBA. These numbers are very similar for other sports and just shows you how hard it is to make it professional. Another good reason why it is good for these athletes to stay in school and get a degree is because it is a good backup plan. Playing professional in any sport is a great accomplishment, but just because you may have to make it doesn't guarantee you have a spot on that roster for the next year or even the next game. Unfortunately, life isn't fair and stuff happens. Maybe someone comes on the team and does better than you and takes your spot, or the worst happens and you get injured. Unfortunately, they aren't guaranteed a spot and sometimes may never come back from an injury. That's when it is good to have a backup plan, such as a college degree. So in conclusion, even though that a lot of people feel that the scholarships they receive, that these athletes receive, is enough, it's not because of how much time they dedicate. It's not because of how much time they dedicate to their sport. Paying these college athletes would benefit them in so many ways, including teaching them financial responsibility at a younger age and before they make all the money going pro. All these reasons are just some that I have mentioned and why college athletes should get paid. So next time you're at a college event, just think of how much time those players are putting into that sport to put on a good show for you and the fans.